They had failed to consider and failed to prepare for one horrifying outcome when it comes to foreign policy. What if America does a good thing sometimes?
Hey now, it's your boy PSA Sitch here with another Tuesday stream with everyone's favorite cereal producing schmoozer, Adam Friendly.
What's up? How you doing, Sitch? I see we have a guest today.
We do.
Who's this guy?
Hello, nice to meet you. My name is Dylan Burns. I'm the CIA's favorite asset.
Oh wow, a Fed on the show. Wow,
Yeah,
crazy.
born and raised in the DMV around DC. I have to be a Fed.
That's pretty hilarious. So, Dylan is joining us today to hang out and to talk politics and stuff like that. Dylan recently went to what's it called?
The Rage Against the War Machine rally.
The Rage Against the War Machine rally. Wow. Okay.
They must have been very proud of that title, by the way. I could tell they were really proud of that one.
They said it every 10 seconds.
Is it a machine that's raging against the war, or is it people raging, or is it a rally raging against the war machine? I'm confused by this.
I think it's an eternal rage against the war machine, right? And they're rallying to center that rage, I think.
So you want to give us a rundown? What was the experience like? Well, first, what is it? I mean, that's the title doesn't really say what it is.
So the Rage Against the War Machine rally was an event organized by a ton of different groups and sponsored by a ton of different groups. On one hand, you have like the Center for Political Innovation, which is like Caleb Maupin's group, if you're familiar with him. He's just come back after the Spanky controversy he got into as a Spanky Tanky. There was, are you familiar with that, by the way?
No.
Spanky Tanky?
So Caleb Maupin got into trouble because he was, how do I put this lightly? He would basically force conversations about spanking and his spanking fetish on his communist comrades who were working under him, and got caught paying some of his communist comrades to have spanking-esque conversations with him.
Wait, just conversations, not like the actual activity?
Well, yeah, he would. Well, yes.
Okay, it's even weirder, but all right.
Yeah, but that's unrelated to the event, but he's back from the controversy. He kind of went away for a bit, went on like a spanking spiritual journey, and now he stopped. There was them. There was
spiritual
a lot of
journey to stop spanking or more spanking?
Stop forcing spanking conversation on others.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
I got
spanking
you.
prohibition.
Okay,
absolutely.
Gotcha.
There was the Mises Caucus was involved. A bunch of different Libertarian Party chapters were. I think Delaware was there. The Maryland Libertarian Party was there. The chair of the Libertarian Party was heavily involved with organizing this event. The Mises Caucus was there, which is kind of like the faction of the Libertarian Party has taken over recently. A bunch of different groups was there. The People's Party was there. Which is, I don't know how to put the People's Party, but they're like this new third party that's like, we're like the populist anti-establishment left. Jimmy Dore promotes them a lot. Jackson Hinkle used to promote them. I don't really see him promoting it anymore. They had a ton of different speakers, which got them into a lot of trouble, because the point of the event, if you go to the website, they have a bunch of listed like points of the event, including disbanding NATO. But the main focus of it was, we want to stop sending aid to Ukraine, and we need to make the Ukrainians accept a peace deal. We need Biden to negotiate with the Russians and make a peace deal now to stop the war. But the problem is, not only do I think their list of demands is kind of all over the place. I like disbanding NATO. Shouldn't you focus on the war right now that's happening and how NATO has stopped them from invading all these other countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania? But the people they booked included a bunch of people who are just pro-invasion. And so if you're hosting a rally that's against the war, and you have people speaking there who are for the invasion, like openly for the invasion, like Jackson Hinkle. I think Cynthia Nixon has been has praised the Putin and the regime and their policies towards Ukraine as well. I know that I actually, Tara Reid was there, and I saw her like praising Russian flags that are in the crowd, and I'll get to that later. But Jackson Hinkle's probably a more obvious example, somebody who's like very pro-invasion. He thinks Ukraine's a Nazi state, that Ukraine provoked it all, and that the Russians need to win. He even, said that one time that he'll vote for whoever runs, and will cede all of Ukraine to Putin, like just like blatantly pro-invasion. And so a lot of libertarians that I know personally, members of the classical liberal caucus, which I have a decent relationship with a lot of their members, and others who would traditionally go to a rally of this sort, ended up dropping their support or just pulling out because they didn't want to be associated with a bunch of pro-war, pro-invasion people. This only got worse when they found out the background of Scott Ritter. I don't know. Are you familiar with Scott Ritter?
Mm-mm.
No.
Scott Ritter is a former UN weapons inspector who, I think 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, was caught trying to sext children and send pictures of his dong to kids.
No.
But he
I was going to bring up a picture, but maybe not.
well, if you do bring up a picture of his mugshot because he was convicted, and he did go to the slammer over it. And he got in a lot of trouble because who he thought was, for him, a child that maybe he could go diddle was instead an FBI agent with handcuffs. So he kind of fucked himself there. Mm-hmm. So they invited him to speak at the event after all of that because he is against aid to Ukraine, but he's also just a massive clown all around the war in general. He's pro-invasion. Like a few days, I think a week and a half before the event, he said that Russia needs to shoot Ukraine like it's a dog. They need to put it down. Like very just blatantly pro-invasion, and also a pedophile. And so that got a lot more people to pull out and not want to kind of like associate with the event. And it got a lot of condemnations, even to the point where they eventually ended up kicking him off. And that was the one person that kicked off. But for a lot of people, the damage had already been done. And so there was a lot of controversy going into the event. So I didn't really know what to exactly expect. I probably worsened. I don't know if it helped or hurt me that I hadn't gotten any sleep the night before. And I also had a massive hangover from the night before. I think it probably helped keep me cool because I just wasn't in a mood to argue with anybody. So it just made me like stay focused on interviews. But I got there, and I would say for the entirety of the event, I would say there's probably a range of 1,000 to 2,000 people, 2,000 if you're being very generous. Now, those people, if I go to the 2,000 end, I'm including people from the Lincoln Memorial who just kind of wandered over and just checked out and then leave, like random tourists, locals who were confused and just biking by or walking by, checking it out and keep going, counter protests. Like if you include literally everyone, even those who don't even support the event, then maybe you can get closer to 2,000. But I would say the 1 to 2K range was probably their turnout. The wild thing is, the first person I recognized at the event was Matthew Heimbach in the crowd. Are you familiar with Matthew Heimbach?
No.
Matthew Heimbach was one of the organizers for the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. He also founded the He also founded the White Students Union. Vice did a documentary about that back in the day that is pretty popular. He was also the former communication director for the American Nazi Party.
Did you interview him?
No, I did not interview him.
Oh, okay.
I just didn't.
Is that not allowed, or?
No, I just didn't want to interview him. I didn't want to talk to him.
Right.
To be quite frank. But I noticed he was there, and he was backed up by people flying like Imperial Russian flags from like the 1800s, 1900s, like a very short period of time in the Russian Empire's history. And this flag is only associated with the Russian far right. And while I bring that up as they were the first people I saw, let me be clear: the majority of the event was not Nazis and white nationalists, but it is a weird feeling that they were like the first people that I saw. As for the people who made up the event, I would say it's a combination of libertarians. There were a decent portion of libertarian. LaRouchites. There were a lot of LaRouchites, and a lot of them recognized me and would walk up to me and try to convince me of the tenets of LaRouchism. There was a lot of Marxist-Leninists, hardcore communists, people that would be traditionally called tankies. Some just, I guess, socialist types that aren't communist. A lot of old hippies, to be quite frank. A lot of people who are, in the 50s and 60s and from the old hippie movement, the type of people who, maybe look at nuclear energy and be like, I don't trust that. You remember 3 Mile Island, those types.
Oh yeah, 3 Mile Island.
As the event was promoted on Tucker Carlson's show, like the day or 2 days before, I didn't meet really many just kind of like Republicans. It was, I don't want to say it was just all political schizos, because there were people who I wouldn't like call political schizos, but it was people on the political fringes just generally at the event. Not a lot of moderates, was not really appealing much to the center, which isn't terrifyingly, much surprising to me, considering, who a lot of the speakers were, and they didn't really appeal much to the political center here. But there were also a sizable portion of, even though they were not the majority, of people who just supported the invasion. I documented and I took pictures, and they are on my Twitter, of a decent amount of Russian flags that were there, different versions of the Russian imperial flag. There was actually, I think I counted 3 separate versions of the Russian flag. One, the like normal Russian flag you see all the time, the one that's associated with the Russian far right, and one with like the coat of arms on it. There was like 3 separate variations of it I saw. And that kind of, rubbed me the wrong way, because I feel like it was the wrong message to send at an anti-war rally, to be flying the flag of the invading country, including their imperial flag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, even though I'm in favor of supporting Ukraine, I'm sympathetic to some people like afraid of World War III, or, not, being afraid.
Let me be clear. That was the number one
anti-war
concern I heard was from people I talked to, was the World War III concern.
That was the only concern, or
no? That was the number one concern.
Right.
Because it's the best rationale for being anti-war.
Yeah, exactly. But then it's like, that's it's so far away from like, oh, but I want Russia to invade. And it's like, they should have really tried to stamp down and kick those people out. Because if you're like anti-war, that's going to make you look horrible.
I have a couple questions. What is a LaRoucheite for people who might not know?
LaRoucheites are people who follow the ideas of this man called LaRouche, that has this idea that like we should I think he's dead now, but has this idea that we should be a lot more friendly with China, that we should like maybe have like an interconnected like rail system with China. China, and it's like a lot of I forget all of the proposals, because it's kind of some crackpot stuff. But if you have some free time to look into it, it's pretty bizarre. He's also been accused of some pretty blatant anti-Semitism as well.
Oh, okay.
But they're pretty politically fringe, and they had gone away for a while, but recently they've kind of resurged a bit. Actually, one of their candidates quote tweeted one of the videos they tweeted out from the event, when I interviewed a Russian who was there, who was counter protesting against the event, and was saying like anti-Putin stuff, because a lot of people who are members of the Russian diaspora are people who are gone because they don't like Putin, or they overseas, they have access to information that they don't have as easily accessible at home, and so they're not as supportive of the Russian government. One of their candidates actually quote tweeted me and was like, "You paid this person, you paid them to say this on camera," which was weird, because all the LaRoucheites I met in person, while I still think they follow a crackpot ideology, they were generally nice to me in person. Not everyone was, but I got a generally nice reaction. It wasn't a violent event, which I was very happy about. Definitely, since there were like open white nationalists there, people who were involved in violence at Charlottesville.
Well, aren't they all for the NAP though? The non-aggression principle.
The non-aggression.
I mean, they're all supposed to be libertarians, right?
Well, again, it was like
violence breaks out at NAP rally. It's like, what?
They were so ideologically all over the place that I would say that there were. I think there were some people there that probably under separate circumstances would be violent, like the person who was involved in Charlottesville. I would say quite evidently.
Yeah, I feel like the libertarians very often end up getting unwittingly roped into either like being associated, like not associated, like it feels like a lot of people take advantage of libertarians, essentially, like the far right, the far left. Like they'll use some libertarian cause and kind of sneak in under it, and then just be fucking, they're not actually libertarian. They just side with anti-government ideas at that time period.
Yeah, I mean the whole pitch for this event, and I talked to people about. Nobody would defend them booking Scott Ritter. Usually people would dodge the question when I brought up. He's a
pedo, so it's kind of
yeah, it's kind of like if you're gonna ramble about Jeffrey Epstein, of course, horrible person, but if you're gonna make like say Jeffrey Epstein was involved with all these people and it's a deep state like pedophilic cabal, if you're very sympathetic to that idea, it's kind of hard for you to defend like booking a pedophile on your stage. But the best defense people would give for booking Scott Ritter and booking all of these more pro-invasion people was the idea that, look, our main priority is stopping World War III, and we will work with literally anyone and everyone in order to stop World War III. The problem I have with that, and for me personally, the worse they do these events, the better for me, because I want to send aid to Ukraine. I'm very supportive of Ukraine. I went over there and covered the war. I'm going back next month to film with IED crews. The thing that didn't connect with me was a lot of the locals who were passing by were completely confused at the intent of the event. I remember one person passed by and they literally just said, and I overheard them say, "Is this a pro-Russia protest?" Because they saw the Russian flags.
Wow.
They heard somebody call Ukraine a Nazi state. And then they were like, "Is this just like a pro-Russia protest?" And these are locals, completely on it, like they don't know about the event, right? Because a lot of people live in DC and they're very used to political protests being there. I live in the DC area; you just kind of get used to it. And some of them just, they're used to seeing it, so they just saw it. So no, they assumed that and they just kept moving. They didn't expect it any further. They didn't get much of a positive reaction from locals. I read in on the metro system because I live in the area. And I didn't see anybody from the metro system like coming in. It felt like they bust in a lot of people. And I looked into it and they did bust in a lot of people. It seemed to be mostly people from out of the area. And the locals that I did see there were not reacting to it very positively. So I feel like by them allowing everyone and anyone in and working with everyone and anyone, including people who are pro-invasion at your anti-war event, you ended up kind of, marginalizing or pushing people away who would maybe more likely be willing to support it, which in my eyes is terrible for them, but good for my cause at least.
Right. So I looked up Scott Ritter was actually caught twice over an 8-year period trying
he went
to
back for
solicit
seconds.
sex.
Yeah.
Yes, this like in 2001, he gets caught trying to solicit some kind of sex from a 16-year who he thought was 16 as a police officer, and then he manages to get by with a low 6-month probation charge. But then in 2009, he does it again. You think he didn't learn his lesson the first time?
Yeah, no,
it's the exact same thing, and this time he gets like 1 to 5 years in prison.
He's a double.
Not long enough.
He's a double dipping kitty diddler. And the thing is, recently, and like after the event, others still invited him to speak. For example, Caleb Maupin's group invited him to speak at the Center for Political Innovation event they were happening after the rally. So he was still able to, market himself and, expose himself to all these people and build up his reputation off of it. And of course, he kind of like did the whole "woe is me, I'm so persecuted. Everybody has skeletons in their closet" type like response to it.
What? Not everywhere.
Yeah, I forget exactly what he said, but he released
That's
some
a pretty
statement
rare skeleton, dude.
Yes.
Yeah, he released some statement along those lines. It was pretty silly.
So I want to about the LaRouche thing. I don't know LaRouche. You said he's anti-Semitic, but I mean, like, I think Sitch has been accused of anti-Semitism, and he's Jewish. Like they accuse Ben Shapiro of anti-Semitism all the time. So.
Oh gosh, I'd have to go back and look at the specific.
Well, no,
quote.
you don't have to. I want to let it be known for the audience because sometimes they're like, "Look, I'm a LaRoucheite, and that's all." I don't know if he's anti-Semitic or not. So, this is the problem with calling every single person on Twitter an anti-Semite. I'm curious though, like if you interviewed some of these guys from the Unite the Right rally who are obvious, we'd probably call them racist. Like if you interviewed Richard Spencer or someone who people think of as I guess classically racist. Like if you posted that on your channel, what would your audience response be? I'm just curious.
I think my audience would be fine with it because personally I want to interview bad people or like people who are not necessarily morally upstanding because I think you can get stuff out of it. If I got the opportunity to interview war criminals, I would do it. Right. Because I think there's a journalistic purpose to that. I just had a hangover and hadn't slept the night before.
Right. And
I didn't feel like talking to the guy who was, I didn't think I could properly ask him the questions because it was like, fuck, I don't want to have to Google the shit quick and then going over there. I just didn't want to talk to him.
So, but you're honing in on the left needs adequate pushback on whoever you interview. Otherwise they feel like, oh, you just let him get away with all this shit, right?
I can give you what his pushback would be because other people did interview him at the event and I looked at the interviews afterwards. Okay. He says he's no longer racist. And now
well, good for him.
He's an Nazbol now, which is
that's not good.
Wait a minute.
That's not a great turn.
He's now patriotic is his thing.
I see.
Oh, okay. Well,
he's not. Listen, he's not racist.
Look, he dedicated 20 years.
Group.
Yeah, he dedicated 20 years of his life to the neo-Nazi and white nationalist cause. But
well, hold on. Just to be clear here, you're not saying all patriots are Nazis, are you?
Oh, every single one. If anybody votes any way differently to me, then you hate.
Okay. Hopefully you're memeing because I don't think that's the case, but. This is the thing. Like, you've been on the show, I think, a couple times now, but I mean, I think you're probably further left than us. Like, we call ourselves centrist, and like, I don't think every single conservative is a racist or a Nazi. I think, other creators obviously do think that. And I think it's kind of a bad stereotype, because you end up lumping a bunch of conservatives in that, they just want low taxes and like the government out of their business, and they're being considered to be racist, which I don't think they like.
Right. But if you go from a neo-Nazi to a Nazgul.
Well, no, I'm not this guy, like, who knows?
Yeah.
I don't think every Republican's racist or
right.
like I remember somebody at the event asked me, actually, what do you think of the people here? Do you think they're all terrible, bad people? And I'm like, I don't know. I think probably most of them are good meaning or somewhat well intentioned.
Yeah.
I just think either they have been lied to, or they maybe don't have their facts in order, or possibly just have a completely separate set of values than I do. I do think there were people there that are sacks of shit. But I try not to completely demonize the opposition. I even do this when it comes to Russia. Of course, I'm very sympathetic to Ukraine, but I assume that a lot of these Wagner prisoners that were sent to go fight and die were not like, hey, I voluntarily like a lot of them were like, hey, you're going to be given a gun and you're going to go and fight and die,
right?
Because like that's what they were instructed to do, or they were kind of like force fed that, or like pushed to do it. I try my best not to dehumanize people, just generally.
Do you think that Wagner guy is going to replace Putin? You think he's going to?
No, he seems to be losing ground right now. They seem to they have stopped prison recruitment, and prison population has stabilized, so that seems to be true. They're becoming less and less influential in the Battle of Bakhmut, as their Wagner units are being replaced by official Russian military units. He recently, some audio leaked of him getting really fucking angry about the fact that the Russian military command, despite having the surplus in order to send him ammunition, they're not sending him the ammunition. Whether or not this is an issue just generally across the Russian military, which I've read about, that they have like an ammo shortage. Well, they have the ammo, but they're not getting it to them because they have bad logistics. Or this is like power politics, like them backstabbing each other in the middle of a war in order to get influence over the other, which I think is almost certainly happening. I don't know what percentage of it is just the Russian military being incompetent, and what percentage of it is the Russian military actually trying to like nudge him. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Interesting stuff. So speaking of not having your facts in order, we were talking about that Jimmy Dore clip that you were spreading around, trying to get us in trouble on Twitter before we.
I was spreading it around. Like crazy.
Come on, why? Jimmy Dore is a friend of the show. Why are you trying to get us in trouble, Dylan? What's going on here? That thing got like 1,500 retweets.
How dare you?
I try to be when I saw kids come off the short bus, I tried to be their friend too. I understand, but the problem was that he had nothing to back up this claim about the CIA organizing a coup in Ukraine after repeating it probably more than 50 times or 60 times.
He repeated it just on TV.
He has Aaron Mate though. He
repeated it at the rally. He repeated that at the rally.
Exactly.
So he spoke at the rally. What was that?
He did speak at the rally.
What was that like? What do you have to say?
So most of it was like comedy, where he was trying to make political points and he was doing comedy. And I'm a big Norm Macdonald fan. I don't know what type of comedy you like. He's my favorite comedian.
Norm Macdonald's great.
I unironically cried when he died. I read his book. He's a fantastic comedian. And something he said that really communicated with me when he was like the host of a comedy game show is, I hate the type of comedy where people clap instead of laugh. He said something along those lines. And it felt like the comedy was like that. And the jokes that he did like push out, that he was really attempting to be funny, it didn't get much of a reaction. And it probably wasn't helped by the hecklers who were yelling stuff like, we now know why you quit comedy, Jimmy. We now know why you can't get booked. It was like, this is a little sad, but the crowd loved him. But it was like one of those kind of like clapping, not laughing type of comedy skits, which I personally have never been a fan of.
Wow, that's a low blow. I'm sure Jimmy will be disappointed.
Unlike Adam, I thank you for spreading around the clip of him running like a little bitch.
I am memeing. You share whatever clips you want, Dylan. Obviously, I'm just giving you a hard time. So
obviously, I will deceptively edit you to no end.
Yeah. Well, don't do
make us
that.
look good,
Please.
as long as
Look,
that's what's
you're a
happening.
friend of the show until you start deceptively editing out.
Jimmy, friend of the door, exactly.
Jimmy, friend of the Dore. The thing that gets me about Jimmy Dore and the whole Ukraine, just his commentary on Ukraine, is it's just lie after cherry picking after cherry picking. There's not like the slightest amount of intelligent analysis there. It's other people telling him stuff that he accepts at face value,
Yes.
not going back and looking any of the facts or the evidence. For example, recently he was on the PBD podcast. Are you familiar with that show? It's a really big conservative leaning podcast.
Is that the guy who just talked to Dave Pacman?
Yes, I reviewed that. I think Pacman did pretty good there. I think generally. I'm a Pacman fan. I'm a Pacman cuck. But
I'm not
you
a
really?
Pacman fan at all.
Wow.
I do like
But I
Pacman,
think that guy was pretty unfair to Pacman in that conversation, and he did a pretty good job defending himself.
So Jimmy was on that show, and the amount of just like deceptive points he made where he would say something but leave out information. One thing that really pissed me off was him bringing up the idea that Ukraine murdered 15,000 people in the Donbass. I heard this number all the time,
Right?
and it's meant to it's a point for the Russian state, meant to try to prove that Ukraine was committing a genocide against the Russian-speaking people of the Donbass. The problem with that statistic is that's the total amount of deaths in the entirety of the war. So that number includes Ukrainian soldiers' deaths. And so that means the number he's saying for the people that Ukraine murdered includes Ukrainian soldiers killed by the Russian-backed rebels. It doesn't make any sense. It's just a lie. It'd be like me saying 60 million people died in the Holocaust. Well, no, that's the entirety of the casualties of World War II. It just doesn't make any sense. It's just deceptive.
Yeah, it'd be like saying all the people that died in the Civil War was all, Southern Confederates that died because of the North. It's like, well, not really.
It just I have never I don't think I've ever really respected him. And this isn't the only issue he does this with. He does this with most of his foreign policy takes. I think he's probably
with everything, with all his takes.
I don't pay attention to a lot of his other takes. I know he said stuff about but I don't really pay attention to that. I'm a foreign policy nerd, right? But he does this all the time with almost every issue in foreign policy. Well, he'll just have somebody else tell him what to say, not like directly, like you're going to say this, but they'll tell him their opinion or their interpretation of the conflict, and then he'll go out, repeat that, and then know none of the history. I've confronted other people on this, on that type of stuff before, and what happens is anytime they get confronted is exactly what happened on your show, Sitch, with Jimmy, because since he didn't know anything more than what other people told him, he didn't read the source material, he didn't listen to the phone call, like he just kind of didn't know what to do and he ran away.
Well, it's annoying because there are people like Jimmy, there are people like our good friend Kurt, who they just memorize they just memorize all these different talking points and they just regurgitate them. As you said, they don't do any research. They don't even think about them in any sort of broader context. They just regurgitate them to you. And when you challenge on them, they either run away or they'll just hop to I have another list of talking points. I'll just jump from topic to topic. And for some reason, if you can just memorize a bunch of lines, that makes people think that you're intelligent or they have something worthwhile to say.
Absolutely. If you just shoot out a bunch of statements very fast enough that nobody can respond, then you're golden. Actually, in that PBD interview, I counted like 5 or 6 lies in a 2-minute time period. It was absolutely crazy. Here's one example of some deceptive stuff that he does, where he doesn't necessarily lie, but he leaves out information that I think is extremely vital. For example, he said that the United States used neo-Nazis to overthrow the Ukrainian government in response to Yanukovych wanting to have more economic ties with Russia. And then he just moves on from that. Yeah. Doesn't say anything else. He doesn't include the fact that Russia was trying to economically coerce Ukraine after saying they wouldn't in the Budapest Memorandum by stopping trade after Yanukovych was fulfilling a campaign promise that he made in 2012 that helped get him elected in the first place, that he would have visa-free travel with the European Union, which would be extremely helpful for a lot of Ukrainians who want to go overseas and work and send money back home and could be seen as possibly cash flow into the country, as well as other trade agreements. And
it was a law too.
Yeah, and the majority of Ukrainians supported that. And it was only after the Russians went back on their word and used economic coercion, stopping 25% of all of Ukraine's trade, that Yanukovych turned around, said, never mind, at the last moment, I'm pulling out of this agreement after we've done all the negotiations. I'm going to enter Russia's agreement. That's when protesters went out to the street, and that's when the police and literal hired mobsters, and I mean actual hired gangsters, hired by the state, called Tutushkis, were sent out to maim and eventually murder Euromaidan protesters. The Ukrainian people see that, they respond, they protest, they're angry. It expands into the Automaidan, expands across the country. Negotiations fail, and eventually, Yanukovych flees the country. That is a lot different than what he implied. By leaving out all that information, he made it look like the United States overthrew the government because we wanted access to Ukrainian resources, when it was the Ukrainian people who voted for Yanukovych, in part because he made a promise that he went back on after the Russians made him cave to economic coercion, which they promised not to do.
Yeah.
He leaves that out. And because the reason he leaves that out is if he includes that information, then he can't make it look like that the United States was at fault there.
He calls it the 2014 coup, like constantly. That's like his go-to thing. Did you see our second talk with Dave Smith? Because the clip was from the first talk with Dave Smith.
No, I did not. What was that like?
Well, Dave Smith came. Go ahead, Sitch. Like Dave Smith came back and.
Well, wait. So I was gonna say, was it in the? I think it was in the Jimmy. Was it the Jimmy talk or the Dave Smith talk where I explained everything that you just said about the economic coercion? Which one was that? Was that
second
the first talk?
Obviously. Like we didn't get to do really.
Yeah, because I remember when I explained
talk.
all this to Dave, I felt like he had no clue what I was talking about.
We went through the phone
just the
call.
first time I've ever heard it, but it was insane because so we get Dave to come back on, who he wants to run for president under the Libertarian Party, and he's made all sorts of claims that are basically the same as Jimmy on Ukraine, and we go through the phone call like right in the beginning, and we spend like, I don't know, it's like a 3-hour conversation. I think we spent like an hour and a half, 2 hours on the phone call, because he comes up with like the wildest, wackiest theory, which is like, well, Sitch, I mean, what you're saying could possibly true, but they don't with 100% certainty say that this is what they're referring to. So therefore, I can interpret the phone call in any way I want, even though I have no evidence.
But Sitch reads the transcript, and you can't listen to the transcript and not think 100% Sitch's narrative is correct. Like, that's the thing. Everyone's listening to it going, well, I mean, they said it pretty explicitly.
The thing that really gets me is that, and I think you might have mentioned this at the time, Sitch, is that they went against the advice of American officials, protesters. They were telling them that the idea of getting Yanukovych to step down is too far-fetched. He's not going to do it. So accept the terms that he's giving right now, and maybe you'll be able to get some concessions here and show some success of your movement. They don't accept the advice. They don't accept the advice of other people in Ukraine who tried to make them take that advice through the negotiations, and they went a different path than what America wanted them. If it was a CIA America-backed coup, why were they following the exact opposite advice of the United States and pursuing the revolution of dignity?
Well, you don't understand. So Kurt had an answer for this. He said it's because you don't understand, Sitch, that story that the U.S. was saying the opposite, that was actually planted by the CIA, in 2013, because they knew that people were going to debate it in 2023 on the internet. So
I think there should be an IQ test to run for president.
He did. What do you mean? He did say that. He said, when I brought up the Reuters article about the phone call, he said that this was all part of the conspiracy. And I said, how is this part of the conspiracy? This phone call leading to the 2014 coup narrative only came up recently.
I don't recall that.
Yeah, you pushed that out of your memory.
We recently, and I haven't seen the clip yet, but evidently Kurt gave us a shout out on the Jimmy Dore show. I think he called us a
negative shout out, supposedly.
Well, there's no such thing as bad press. I think he called us like Nazi bootlickers or something. But
yeah, that's not bad press, is it? To call us Nazi bootlickers?
Well, at least he said we were friends. He said his friends, Sitch and Adam.
That's like when we say like our good friend, Brianna Greyjoy or something.
We haven't seen the clip yet. I'm sure Kurt has the best of intentions.
Oh, I'm sure.
Look, I often call my friends Nazi bootlickers in like a term of endearment. Often.
Right. It's like the white version. It's like the white version of saying the N-word. Yes. What's up, my Nazi bootlickers?
Have I told you about the story of the one time I met a Nazi in Ukraine?
No, tell us.
So I
only once? I thought they were swimming with Nazis.
I met one Nazi. I met a lot of soldiers. There would be some times where I would see like a Slavic rune, and it would make me raise an eyebrow because like Slavic runes and like pagan stuff can sometimes like overlap. But we're also in a part of the world where this also has actual historical ties to, and there are legitimate pagans in Ukraine. So it's like sometimes hard to tell, but there's certain ones that are dead giveaway. But the one person I know for 100% sure it was a Nazi because they had literal like SS symbols and everything, was a right sector guy. And I could tell he was a right sector guy because he had a big right sector tattoo on the side of his neck. He had an SS symbol on his bag. And he was wearing what looked like basically just like a German uniform. It looked like he was wearing something totally different than everybody else was wearing.
Was he a soldier or just civilian?
Oh yeah, he was a soldier.
Oh, okay.
And the fuck thing is I didn't notice any of this for the entirety of the thing until afterwards when I was looking at the footage. And at one point we were hiding from a drone that had spotted us, which was trying to get artillery to like hit our position. And so we were hiding in the woods, waiting for a moment to get in the van and run. And he walks over to me, and he hands me he was like, puts a Snickers in my face to like offer me a Snickers bar. And I took it, and I took a bite out of it, not seeing the SS symbol on his bag or like putting two and two together in like with the tattoo. And so I ate a Nazi Snickers bar in Ukraine.
No.
Oh man.
Yeah. How close were you to?
You're not you when you're hungry.
Yes. How close were you to like actual gunfire a lot of times or explosions?
I mean, the closest, like just generally in the war, you mean? Like,
yeah.
The closest I ever got to an explosion was about 100 to 150 feet. And I was in the city of Mykolaiv on the day of the Kherson counteroffensive, which, if you know where Mykolaiv is, it's like above Kherson. So this is the direction the Ukrainians are attacking from. And while I was in the city, I was in I actually went to a hospital that had been bombed by the Russians to interview hospital staff and just get footage. And while on the roof of the hospital, can't believe they allowed me to go onto the roof of a bombed out hospital. Very nice staff there. We saw airstrikes hitting the city from a distance, and we saw the anti-air stuff responding. I was like, oh, what's going on here? We got some footage of it, and we later went to a steakhouse because I'm a fat American, and we were sitting there, and we started getting updates about the counteroffensive, and now all of a sudden we're trying to talk about realigning our aid delivery route because we're trying to deliver aid to a dog shelter in the area that's taking care of like all the dogs that have been abandoned and injured by the war.
When's that video drop? That's like a tearjerker.
The stuff about the dogs, I haven't dropped anything on that yet because that was actually for
what
a friend's
What are you doing?
piece.
That's your viral video right there. Saving dogs in Ukraine. My God.
It was for a piece that my Polish friend and my colleague Patrick Hillsman were working on. So I don't want to steal their stuff.
Oh my God.
I don't want to steal their stuff. I don't want to be cutthroat. I want to be an angel.
They're going to be on CNN, and you're going to be like, God, I should have listened to Adam. What was I thinking?
It was actually CBS. But I was while we left the place trying to figure out what we're gonna do, we had made the call that we're still gonna do the aid delivery, right? And while we're walking out of the car and out of the steakhouse, walking towards the van, a shell falls 150 feet to me, to I think my left. And then like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other shells fall across the entirety of the city center in our area. We get in the van, we drive like a mile away, get out, and then they are continuously also shelling that area. Another shell falls about 150 to like 200 feet away, and I'm trying to film as much of it as possible. It's on my YouTube channel. It's titled "Getting Shelled by the Russian Army." It's a pretty spot on title. They had killed they had injured, I think, about like 12 or 13 people that day, killed 5 or 6 or something. I forget the exact numbers, but yeah, I was very lucky. If it was any closer, I would have either be seriously injured or killed. So I'm happy that I didn't die.
Yes. Well, like when you said that the drone spotted you, like how many people were you with?
I was with probably like 10 or 15 Ukrainian soldiers.
And like you see like a drone, and you're like, oh shit, and then like
no, it wasn't that. So we had pulled off on the side of the road when we were headed towards the forward operating position. The forward operating position was a mile from the Russians, so it's literally the last position until the Russians, and we were heading towards that to get some footage. But then when we were about a few miles away from it, we get a call, and they're like, they're shelling us right now, do not come, right? And so we pull off on the side of the road, and we're just waiting there for 30 minutes. They set up kind of like an impromptu checkpoint, and they're receiving information from people who are driving by who possibly were scouts. They didn't tell me what they were, probably for operational security reasons, so I have no clue exactly who they were. But then I hear like this weird, kind of like, it sounded like a swarm of bees. Or like, you know when your phone vibrates when you turn it off, and it zzz, It sounded like that, like a small electrical motor, and it's the slightest buzzing. And I hear it for like a good 5 seconds. I turn to my friend Patrick Hillsman, and I'm like, "Do you hear that?" And he says, "Hear what?" And I'm like, "Never mind," because I'm just like, I must be hearing things, right? Because when I think of like, oh, scary threat, I think of explosion, bolt, like all those types of things you see in media. You don't ever think the slight buzz of a drone as like a scary thing you have to look out for.
Right.
But then like another 5 seconds after I said never mind, somebody yells drone, and then we run into the forest, and we have to wait in the forest for a bit as the drone's circling overhead. But after 5 minutes, they make the call that we need to get in the van and get out of there because that drone probably knows where we are, and they're probably going to tell artillery where we are, and then they're probably going to bomb the spot we were. After leaving, Patrick Hillsman, I don't know this, but he's adamant that they did probably shell the place, because afterwards we heard shelling that was pretty close.
Right.
That could have been the place that we were at. Now, I didn't go back and check, so I can't say. At the second place we were at, we only went like a mile or 2 miles away and then parked this van back in the forest. So we were still in range of everything, and we were trying to still find a way out. We just wanted to get out of that immediate area. And as we finally were about to leave, the fucking van breaks down.
Oh no!
It's not turning on. And the thing is, I would refer to it, it's not a we thing, as like those things as like steel coffins, because vans and cars and stuff, like the stuff that transports the most amount of troops probably, they have no protection. And somebody could take a Glock to it, and then you could kill people, like, and you could shoot through the door.
Right.
And so if it hits us in the van,
You're done.
we're fucked. I felt safer outside the van in the forest than I did in the van. Not only because it's very thin and like any shrapnel could tear you to shreds, but when you're outside the van, like you can do stuff. You can like be crouched down or lay down or like, stuff to reassure yourself. Even if you're grasping at straws, you can reassure yourself. And all the footage you see online of deaths in this war, 90% of it is vehicles exploding, which kind of gave me a bad impression. And also when you're in the van, you can't do anything, so you're just thinking about it constantly. You're just sitting there hoping that you don't blow up. Eventually they get the van restarted, and we drive off to SPG-9 practice, which is anti-armor training. And from that point on, we were generally safe until we later went to the forward operating position, but we didn't get hurt there. But the van broke down again while we were a mile from the Russians later. So that van really
sucks. A different
sucks.
car. Oh my god.
Yeah.
It's funny how like psychologically, like, I mean, I don't know what real, like maybe you'd be a little bit better in the forest just because you're spread out, right? Where you're in the car, like everyone's on top of each other. But it's mostly just psychological because and I mean, I would be in the same position. I'd be like, oh, I can like look where the mortar's coming and maybe move out of the way. It's like, not really.
No, I mean, like being able to lay it down is good. Being spread out is good. And having the cover of a forest. These are all good things.
That's true.
But when you're in a van, you're just sitting there and you're also just doing nothing. And that's the thing that always freaked me out. It was the same thing in Mykolaiv. When the shells were falling like that close, like 150 feet of me, I wasn't scared because I didn't have enough time or mental capacity to be scared because I was too distracted by the surrealness of getting shelled by the Russian army. Right. It wasn't until later when we drove a mile or two away, I got out the van, I crouched down, and I just had I didn't think about anything. Like my brain was completely blank, but I couldn't say anything. I was just standing there, just kind of crouched down for like a good 30 seconds, just kind of like looking at the floor. And then another shell fell like 200 feet away. We got back in the van, and the moment was done. We kept moving, right? And it was those moments of chaos that I was the least scared because I couldn't think about being scared. But later, afterwards, when you're safe, that's actually when I felt more fear. Or I don't know if it was fear because I knew I wasn't in danger anymore, but I felt something. And it wasn't good.
Your mind is telling you not to do that again. Like, avoid that again.
Just call me a dumbass. Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, it's interesting because, oftentimes you don't feel it in the moment. It's the build up and then afterwards. I think that's also why, like, a lot of people, they get that, I heard it was called that kind of syndrome where they go to war and then they want to just keep always going to war because that feels more comfortable than just like living with, the calmness afterwards.
It's the anticipation that was always the worst. Pretty the worst too. Like driving to the forward operating position was weird. Just like reassuring yourself that like you're not doing something stupid. This is a good thing to do.
Yourself.
You believe in this cause. Yada yada. Right. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to like re-entry in society or stuff, I think I'm probably fine. Right. I mean, it's impossible to say. I mean, 4th of July sucked. right? But besides that, like I think I've been generally okay. But it's like certain sounds and stuff, like
Really,
sounds.
that bothered you, 4th of July?
The fireworks did.
Yeah.
And they did fireworks for like days afterwards. I'm not gonna be the person to go tell people to stop fireworks, you know,
Right.
Because I generally just want to leave people alone. But that did bother me. It would make me kind of like shoot up for a second, look over, and be like, oh, it's just a firework.
Right.
Same thing with anything that sounded like a siren as well, because there was a lot of sirens in Ukraine. You got used to it very quickly.
What's the life for like the average person in Ukraine right now? Is it like kind of normal for people not on the front lines, or is it just totally fucked?
It really depends on what part of Ukraine you're living in. Everybody's dealing with inflated prices or like bad economic conditions right now. Sure. As much as people talk about the amount of aid that Ukraine has gotten, its GDP is still reduced by like, I think over 30%. And even though for me, a lot of the prices are like not bad at all because I'm used to American prices, for a lot of the local Ukrainians, you know, the prices have gone up. And so for everyday living, that's probably one of the major impacts that touches everybody on a day-to-day basis where they can't avoid it, right? Because your father or your brother or your son doesn't die every day, but the price increase affects you every day. Power outages also something, depending on how intense the Russian bombardment campaign against energy infrastructure and how close you are to the front line can affect you more often than not, depending on how close you are. If you're in Lviv, then you might have a power outage every once in a while. If you're in Kharkiv, it's going to be more common because you're closer to the front line. I've been talking to my friends recently, and they said right now it's calmed down, which is good for me because I still need to stream to supplement my income while I'm over there. So I do have some like power generators and friends who can help me out as well. But power outages is also a major issue. And then of course there is the sirens, which are blaring almost every day to some degree.
Right.
So that's something but just because sirens go off doesn't mean you're going to get bombed, but it's a warning that you could be. But people have adapted to that very quickly. Human beings are like that, where they adapt to their environment. And I remember like I don't know how long I was there. Exactly. I think 4 or 5 months, something around that length. But like 4 months in, I was at a restaurant just like eating a steak and a siren went off and I barely noticed I just finished. And I like left like way after the siren was done because I was like, I'm not going to fucking get up and leave my steak for a siren that's probably going to lead to nothing anyway. And even if it did hit the city, what are the odds it's going to hit me? I care about the steak more than my immediate danger right now. So a lot of people have done that because they've just gotten so used to the war, right? Are you going to be running into a bunker for the next 2-3 years, depending how long this war is, on every siren when maybe like 1 in 10 actually leads to an explosion? I do think people should do it for their own safety, but like there's a logic behind it where you ignore it. It's like a seatbelt. Like not everybody always is going to put on the seatbelt every single time, but it's more of an inconvenience. So that's why I don't think everybody does it.
So going back to the Nazi thing, it was kind of interesting with the Nazi Snickers bar. It's like I can understand why you get like the Jimmy Dores of the world who are like and Aaron Mates, the very far left people who, you know, they see Nazis everywhere anyway. So obviously they're going to complain about Nazis, you know, taking over Ukraine. But what's kind of interesting...
True. Wait, that's not true because if they're Russian Nazis, I don't see them at all.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's true. That's true.
They're selective
right.
sites,
they're selectively
obviously.
saying the Nazis, right? But at least what I'm saying is like calling people Nazis is within their wheelhouse. Where it's interesting when you get like, you know, Dave Smith and like the people that are libertarian or far right, and they're sort of echoing this, you know, Nazi claim as well. Like what do you think's happening here with this weird alliance between, you know, far right and far left people on the anti-Ukraine front?
I think it's a few things. I think I think there's a lot of just cynical politics going on where if you call somebody a Nazi, then they're a terrible person because Nazis are terrible people. Therefore, if you're able to paint the Ukrainian cause as a Nazi cause, then nobody wants to support it because who wants to support Nazis? I think that is like the most cynical politic version of it. I also think that for some right-wing people, there's a kind of joy out of being like, this time we get to call the libcucks the Nazis. You're the real Nazi. There's like a joy out of that. I do think there's part of that, and I think for some people on the left, the fact that there's any fascism present in Ukraine, period, which of course there is,
Right.
It's present there as it's present in all societies. That makes them pause, and they're just generally anti-interventionist in the first place. So why even send weapons over, especially if it could possibly end up into the hands of these Nazis we're seeing all the time? Because nobody's gonna and they see it on Twitter all the time. Not because there's just so many Nazis. It's because anytime there is a Nazi, that's going to get 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 more attention than like the random Sergey who's like, I just want to win war and then go home, eat borscht with wife, you know? Like, nobody cares about Sergey. Everybody cares about Hitler 420 Ukrainian lover or whatever.
Well, even beyond the Nazi thing, I'm curious as what your take on, because historically the right in America is very pro-war, very hawkish. And now that's kind of changed in the last 6 years or so. And so, like, what do you think? Why do you think the left and the right have kind of, or the far left and the far right have kind of teamed up in some respect to be like anti-Ukraine or even more pro-Russian?
I think, I think a lot of it is an extension of the MAGA movement, where Russia was, for a lot of right wingers, they're the boogeyman that they kind of like constantly paint us with. And I do think to some extent there's some people who's like, here we go again. You know, we're scapegoating the Russians because you guys don't want to talk about Hillary Clinton or Hunter Biden or on any of these other issues. I think there's a certain percentage of that. I don't know how large that is. I also think after Iraq and Afghanistan, nobody defends the Iraq invasion anymore. Nobody. The last person who did it publicly, I think, was Jeb Bush. Right? Nobody does it anymore. And so after such a failure of an invasion, even if current day Iraq is better than under Saddam Hussein, the cost to get there was too high. The amount of civilian deaths, there's a million problems with it. So people don't like war. People are maybe it's a little bit after Vietnam vibes. Definitely if you add Afghanistan to the equation as well. And so there's some people who are kind of maybe reverting to a more isolationist viewpoint after these two very expensive wars. We spent $2.2 trillion in Afghanistan. I forget exactly how much we spent in Iraq, but it was pretty expensive as well. Which when you hear those numbers and compare it to the amount we've sent over to Ukraine, it's actually exceedingly more expensive considering how little success we have in Afghanistan and how much success we've had with like 1/20th of what we spent in Afghanistan. No, less than 1/20th.
Right.
So I don't really agree with that viewpoint, but I at least understand it. I do also think that there is a component, and you see this with people like Nick Fuentes and others who just generally admire Vladimir Putin and genuinely admire the idea of Russia being like a modern Christian state. Like they don't put up with this homosexuality nonsense, you know. They're fighting for Christianity against the degenerate West, and now they're not hosting drag queen story hours over there, but we host it here because we're all cucked. I think there is a component to that. I don't know how prominent that is within the Republican Party. I don't think I know of any representative who's been elected on the national level, maybe the state level, but I haven't checked, who's going to say that type of stuff openly. So I would say maybe someone like Wendy Rogers on the state level, but I do think that there is a component to that among the base. Maybe I don't know what percentage, but there is a percentage. I saw them at the event.
I agree completely, and I think it's hilarious that you get the far left sort of tankies or the America Bad crowd who's not only just anti the war, but they are supporting Russia. And then you get the far right, Nick Fuentes types supporting Russia. And you're like, wait a minute, how can both sides, for ideological reasons, think that Russia is like supportive of their worldview when obviously, it's impossible. And I think a lot of it is, I think a lot of it is kind of the practical reasons. People just, tired of hearing Russia be blamed for everything. But I do think there is even if people aren't really conscious of it, I think there's a very strong ideological consideration. Like if Russia was still the USSR, if Russia was perceived of as like a very socialist, woke country, and Ukraine was not, I don't think you'd see any of the right-wing people now, or most right-wing people now that are against the war. I'm pretty sure they'd all be in favor of it. And it's just because it's perceived of as like, well, the Western liberal order right now is promoting wokeness and that's bad. So why should I support, even if I don't defend Russia, why should I support this ideology kind of being spread across the globe?
There's an economic part of it too, because obviously the politicians left and right are both in favor of the war effort. So a lot of times libertarians will say, if the left and right agree
Yes,
that someone is
100%.
getting screwed economically.
Right. That's
So,
that's a really good point. Well, first of all,
Yeah.
libertarians, I think, should always be classified in their own category
I
because
do
they're
too,
usually
yeah.
operating and motivated by things that like 90% of the rest of America is not
I'm not
operating by or
thinking about. Yeah,
motivating by,
exactly.
right. Yeah, and so
90%
that is
of
true.
America thinks bipartisanship is good. They
Well,
think
it's
kind
not a
of the
question.
opposite.
Well, I don't think it's that libertarians think bipartisanship is good. And even Jimmy Dore said this.
No,
It's
they
like,
think it's bad. I'm saying.
well, it's not they think it's
yeah.
bad. It's just that they're very cynical of since they're very cynical of the government overall. It's like, well, if both parties are doing something jointly, it must be super bad. Or super
Yeah,
evil.
I do. I was actually going to say that. I do agree with that. I think there's a general idea. Well, if the establishment thinks this, then it's bad,
Right.
right? There's an idea that the establishment was wrong on this, then this, and it should. So it's also wrong on this. At the event, I actually saw signs that were like, they were wrong about Vietnam, they were wrong about Iraq, but now they're right about Ukraine, like leaving out like all these other, for like leaving out World War II, leaving out like 1991, leaving out like Yugoslavia, leaving out all these other conflicts, and just talking about the ones where we feel like cherry picking, like examples in order to like craft a narrative that is impossible to ever be involved in any conflict anywhere and ever be right. Right. Like it really feels like the depths of fringe politics, whether it be on the far right or the far left. But for me, coming from a left wing perspective, especially on the far left, they had failed to consider and failed to prepare for one horrifying outcome when it comes to foreign policy. What if America does a good thing sometimes? They would be completely unprepared for that reality.
Right.
Well, that's
it's
the
funny
reality that we're kind of embracing, but everyone's fighting against us all the way. It's like,
well,
they're gonna kick, punch, and scream until they make sure we do the wrong
what's
thing.
wrong with
keep that
America
American tradition?
What's wrong with America doing something good for once? I mean, come on.
Well, then who will I complain about?
It's funny because like, well, I am sympathetic, and I think it's fair to at least have a starting point of like, well, if the government or the mainstream telling you something, you should be skeptical. I'm like, that's fine.
Yeah.
But you should, that shouldn't be the end point of the answer. And the thing that like a lot of people that when I talk to that have that idea fail to consider is that like, well, there's a difference because there's some people that are just anti-supporting it, and they're like, they're not really defending Russia. But then there are the people that are either defending Russia or in their fervor to be anti-helping Ukraine, they basically just say Russian talking points.
I heard from somebody.
Let me just say it's interesting because it's like these same people who are so like critical of trusting the American establishment or the American media will then turn around and trust like a Russian media or Russian establishment.
The irony.
Right.
When I was at the event, I met this one woman. I had like a 12-minute, 15-minute conversation with them. They were a verbose person. And I just kept asking them questions. And eventually they said that the elections in Crimea and the recent ones after the occupation were more fair and free than the election in 2020. And when I hear that, I don't care like where your position comes from, like part of the aisle you come from. That is just, you wanted something to say that America was bad or America was wrong, and you were going to pull from any source possible to say that. If there is a source out there that'll prove whatever you want to believe, then you will grab it. It's walking back from your conclusion, because they hosted that election. I mean, the Crimea one was blatantly fraudulent as well, but the one in the occupied territory was even worse because they organized it in 5 days after canceling it the month before for safety concerns. They have a very small percentage of the population participate. They have none of the displaced people, which made up a very large percentage of the population of the areas before the war, before the expansion of the war started. They don't let any of them participate because they're not there. They have armed guards, like armed soldiers, go out and get people and drag them to the polls, right? And they stuff the ballot boxes. I mean, it was like blatantly false, but to this person, if you could find any source that would possibly say that, no, it wasn't, it was totally good, then they're going to grab it because it helps their commitment against sending weapons overseas, because if America ever sends a weapon to anywhere overseas, it's bad.
Yeah. I think what happens is that I think a lot of people start with, the fear of World War III, which is legitimate, even though I disagree. I think if we do nothing, that actually increases the threat of World War III. Because then essentially that's signaling to every other, if we do nothing, it signals to every country in the world, you have to get nuclear weapons. Otherwise, because no one will protect you if a nuclear power invades you, essentially.
Absolutely. I agree.
And I mean, it's funny because, when I said this to Kurt, he said that was preposterous. And I was like, how is it preposterous? We invaded Iraq, and what happened? Iran wanted to get nuclear weapons. Korea wanted to get nuclear weapons. They were afraid that we would invade. Now, Western European countries weren't afraid that we would invade because Iraq wasn't, a Western European country. But if Russia invades a Western European country, all of a sudden that's a signal to the rest of the world that thought they were safe, that they're not safe, that they do need to get nuclear weapons. But I think what happens is that people have the starting point that even if I disagree with it, I can say, okay, I think it's legitimate, which is, I don't want the world to end in a nuclear holocaust. But then, since kind of the way the human mind works is that we all just cherry pick and look for, post hoc justifications for everything, they just end up basically, swallowing a lot of Russian propaganda or bullshit facts that the other side is spouting uncritically just to fit the answer that they want to get to, as opposed to just saying, listen, maybe that's all bullshit, but I just am too afraid of starting the nuclear war, so I'm against it.
Can I also, I could ramble about why the odds of a nuclear war breaking out are tremendously low, how it doesn't even make sense if you were Russia to use that type of weapon in this scenario, because it's mostly, if they were to use a tactical nuclear weapon, which would be the most likely weapon they would use, it would mostly be a weapon of terror, and the repercussions for breaking this taboo that has existed for a very long time would be extremely immense. Maybe it could be one of the only scenarios where you might actually get the Chinese government and the Indian government to agree on a price cap on Russian energy exports, which would be horrific for the Russian economy, considering that the Europeans have almost completely stopped buying their energy exports, and they're trying their best to try to sell it other places, but they don't even have the infrastructure in place. And then they take away the rest of their customer. I mean, you're fucked. Not to mention, will this lead to less aid going to Ukraine or more aid going to Ukraine, including radiological aid? Will this make the Ukrainians surrender? Will that make them surrender? Well, there was a poll done recently on this issue, and the vast majority of Ukrainians said that if a nuclear weapon was used, they would not want to surrender and they would want to keep fighting. I remember I was talking to a Ukrainian about this issue or this scenario, and I swear to God, I think they got it from a meme or they got it from somewhere, because I remember hearing it somewhere else as well. But they said that when I asked him about the scenario, he said that Ukraine will have its borders, even if it's the last map humanity ever draws. I don't think that willpower is going to break under the buckle of Russian radiation, and not to mention radiological spill. There's so many issues with it that just make it so unlikely. But people talk about it as if we're a hair's breadth away from nuclear Armageddon. But you look at
the clock.
Yeah,
it's right there.
The clock moved. The clock, the scientific clock. Yes,
Yes.
I agree. That is very scary. The thing that gets me, though, is you listen to Russian statements on this. They make no commitments on anything, ever. It's always, we reserve the right to use these weapons if our territorial integrity is threatened.
Right.
That's no different than the position they've held for the last fucking forever. They've always held that position. They're just repeating it in a more threatening tone.
Yes.
And with Russian state media playing graphics of Dublin in flames, right?
Right.
Until they make a commitment, if they take Crimea, we will use nuclear weapons. That's when I'm like, that's scary, because then if they don't, that means they not only get humiliated, but it also degrades their respectfulness when it comes to using these weapons. So if they make a threat like that in the future, maybe people will say, oh, they're bluffing again. And so that would be the one scenario where it might be a no turning back scenario for the Russians. But they haven't made that commitment, because if they did, then they would actually have to deliver on the promise when the scenario happens, and they don't want to. I don't think they want to. We've heard reports they have considered it, but they haven't done it. So it sounds like they considered it and said, this is a bad idea. This is a terrible idea.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. I don't know. Because on one hand, I would want to say, I wouldn't see the logic in them using nukes or tactical nukes in Ukraine. Because I agree with you. I think the rest of the world, even China and the people that are kind of helping them, would be so turned off by this. I mean, it's completely indefensible, because it's like, oh, you attacked another country and then you were losing, so you started to nuke them. That's just so beyond, that's so impossible.
Nobody told us we could do that
swallow.
during Vietnam.
Yeah, that's just so wild. But the counterpoint is, I also thought it would be completely insanely illogical for Russia to invade Ukraine in the first place. So
they would have a false flag. They would say that the Ukrainians have breached their border. They
nuke themselves.
No. They would have. They would basically make it look like Ukraine invaded their territory and they retaliated with nukes. They're not just going to nuke without some sort of logical excuse, obviously.
Right.
I don't know if you remember this, but during the start of the war, the Russians actually did claim that the Ukrainians invaded them.
Sure,
and
yeah.
And they shared footage, which showed like soldiers crossing the border. But then when that footage was geolocated, it was geolocated to be in territory that's been occupied by the Russians for the last 8 years.
Yeah, no.
And it was found to be Russian soldiers.
I'm not
dressed in
saying it
Ukrainian
would
uniforms.
be real. I'm
I'm not saying it's real.
They're not just going to go, oh, by the way, we were losing, so we nuked you. They're not going to say that.
I'm just showing that they have done this in the past, so they would be probably willing to do it in the future. I just think the negatives just so heavily outweigh the positives. I mean, I can imagine a scenario where Putin is told, due to their perception of their own military might, which could be completely out of whack, and I think it was shown to be completely whack, that they're like, we can win this war, because they were told, oh, our military is strong, our logistics will be fine, there's no will to fight in Ukraine. They're working off of a bunch of incorrect intel, and so they make the decision to invade. I think if they knew that this would happen, they would have never made the commitment to invade. Oh my God, there's no way. But I don't think there's going to be an intelligence officer that tells Putin, oh yeah, no, we can totally use a tactical nuclear weapon and not break, and we'll break the taboo, but it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Like I think that's a lot less likely, considering the historical precedent, than the idea of them invading Ukraine garnering this much of an international response, because they invaded Crimea in 2014. Obama failed to mount a strong enough response to it, and I think that encouraged their behavior to think, oh, well, that's what they did last time, so probably just add more sanctions and do nothing again this time, and Ukrainians will cave in a week, and we'll have a whole new country to add to our empire.
Yeah,
let's
that's what they thought.
Sitch, let's move on from Ukraine. We got a bunch of questions in super chats, though, so
sure,
we need to ask those first, and then we can move on. This is turning into like a Jimmy Dore hug box here, where we're just like agreeing about everything.
Eric, see, listen, there's nothing wrong with talking to someone that we agree with once in a while.
No, it's interesting, because we probably have a lot of disagreement with Dylan on other things, but
I'm sure,
since we're both in agreement on Ukraine, it's just people are like,
Cecil,
no one's articulating my position. I disagree. Look, it's like three people just arguing.
Yeah, but so I understand people that complain about that, but it's like, we've argued people that disagree with us on Ukraine.
Tons.
We've talked to people that disagree with us on Ukraine far more than people that agree. I think Dylan's literally the only person we've had long conversations about Ukraine where we agree with on.
Okay, can I ask you a question? Of all the people who disagree with you on Ukraine, how many of them are Ukrainians or have been there?
Oh, well, zero.
Yeah.
Well, obviously. But,
big shocker.
Right. But I mean, to be fair, I'm not Ukrainian.
Phone call transcript. Zero.
So, yeah. Well, that's true. Eric Cecil for $20. Thank you, Eric. Says, Dylan, what would you say to a Russian-backed Ukraine separatist of the DPR LPR?
Like, what would I say to like one of their fighters?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I guess, yeah.
If I was like asking a question, or like, do you want me to like insult them or something? Like, I don't know. A question.
I don't know. What do they want, Eric?
If I could ask them a question, I guess my question would be: is your life better or worse than it was before secession?
Do you think that the people trying to do the secession have any legitimacy to their claim?
Not really. I've not been able to find any polling data that reflects that there was any large majority or any majority period of Eastern Ukrainians that wanted to secede. The one data point that ever somebody brings up to show that they wanted to secede, and Elon Musk tweeted this out. What a fucking knuckle dragger he was when he tweeted this out. He is this election map from 2012 showing that the majority of Eastern Ukrainians voted for Yanukovych.
Right.
But also, voting for Yanukovych does not mean you want to be part of Russia.
Totally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like if I voted for a president that was very sympathetic or nice to the Canadians, does that mean that now I want to be a fucking Canuck? By God, I'd rather die.
90% of them voted for Zelensky, though, in the following election.
Oh, right. The thing that gets me about Zelensky, and this is a little deviation, but I hear from Jimmy Dore and other people. So I can't believe I'm back to bullying Jimmy Dore.
Yeah,
but I hear from
whatever.
I hear this point sometimes that Zelensky was elected on a peace platform, which is true. He was elected on a peace platform. This idea that they wouldn't be able to kind of like consolidate with that. You know, he lied about running on a peace platform. He did run on a peace platform. He attempted to get peace. Is that the Russians were just so unbelievably impossible to negotiate with and get fair terms for them when it came to Crimea or any of the territory that has been claimed by the Russian-backed rebels, that they weren't able to get peace. And so if anything, I think that's a point to, wow, there was literally nothing the Ukrainians could do to satisfy them within reason.
I think like when it comes to the separatist claim, the way I think about it is, imagine if in America, there was areas of Texas that were very heavily Mexican, and they said, oh, we're going to cede, this part of Texas to Mexico. And they made this whole argument with, well, technically Texas was part of Mexico. We have like large Mexican populations in this area of the country. I mean, obviously all the people saying that are shilling for the separatists now, they wouldn't support that happening in the United States. Just because if like, oh, there was some election and the Mexican population of Texas didn't like, the results.
When I was in Eastern Ukraine, to go to the Frontline point, I met with a bunch of soldiers out there, and when they were doing the SPG-9 training after the drone thing we talked about earlier, I noticed that they were all speaking Russian. Every single soldier that was training to fight the Russians were speaking Russian.
That's smart.
And what I then thought about while I was out in this field watching them do practice was, well, when I go to Ireland, what language do they speak?
Yeah, totally. That's smart. You want to hear what the enemy's saying.
They speak English in Ireland, and we speak English in the United States. Doesn't mean we would be part of England or the UK. The history of the Russian language in Ukraine, and people talk about the Russian language as another justification. They speak Russian, therefore they want to be part of Russia. How many parts of Africa speak French that don't want to be part of France? Like it's like I think a lot of it just comes from a lack of understanding of just Ukrainian internal politics, and how speaking Russian does not necessarily mean you want to be Russian, but we understand it everywhere else. I don't know why it's so hard to understand it in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, there's places in Florida where a lot of Cubans live and they speak Spanish. They don't want to be part of Cuba again. They left Cuba to come here.
Sure, they did leave Cuba.
Yeah.
I see.
Hex says he disagrees with us, and his wife is Ukrainian, and he's been to Ukraine.
Oh, okay.
So there you go.
I concede. Slava Russia.
There you go. Mr. Ubercross, thanks so much for being a free secret for 10 months, says it takes 6 months to get used to combat, and it takes a year to get used to being out of combat. I'm speaking as a 10-year Army vet and mental health services. So
damn. You know what's been weird? Oh God, I don't want to make it sound like I'm claiming like veterans because I'm not a veteran or anything. But I've talked to veterans about their experience in war, and about some difficulties that I've had when coming back to a place that isn't at war. And a lot of the experiences are very different than what I experienced in Ukraine, because most of the veterans I'm talking to are from like Afghanistan and Iraq. And like me talking about like, oh, Russian jets passing overhead, and like, because when I came back, I went to a Gorillaz concert and I got pretty high because I wanted to like, have fun at a Gorillaz concert, just smoke some pot with my buddies. And a plane passed over and I like nearly like laid down on the floor, right? Because it was the first time I heard a plane passing over my head like that in a very long time. It was completely unexpected. And I talked to a lot of them, and they didn't have as vitriolic reactions to that because the Taliban weren't They didn't have an air force. The Iraqi military's air force was completely annihilated. And so it really showed to me that like the experiences people have in war are just so diverse depending upon the conditions of it. Like no two wars are the same. And the experiences and trauma you take from it are not the same either.
Yeah, I don't remember who it was. Someone was talking about who I think had been over there as a volunteer, a person said that they had Army experience in Iraq, and they went over there, and they were talking about how a lot of people who had Army experience in Iraq went over there and were just really shell-shocked because it was so different. Because obviously, as you said, they don't have an air force. They didn't have, the kind of artillery and the kind of firepower that the Russian army obviously has. And it was just, some people were just completely it was not at all what they expected from their previous war experience.
I had dinner with some Foreign Legionnaires, people who were fighting in the Foreign Legion, and they seemed to share that experience. Any of them that had combat experience in those wars, that a lot of the experience they had learned in like anti-insurgency tactics were almost like completely useless, and they had to like they got training on how to fight traditional wars, but they had to like freshen up on a lot of stuff they hadn't really used in any of the wars that they fought. And they had to like experience things for the first time.
Yeah, I think that's part of why the world reacted the way it did to this situation, is that I think a lot of first world countries thought that the era of traditional war was over, that it was just going to be, these sorts of first world country versus the insurgent country kind of offenses.
I think a lot of people were I think Europeans, of course, have had the most kind of emotional reaction to this because they thought, you know, the era of war in Europe is over after after Yugoslavia, after World War II, that the European Union and organizations like that are going to make it nearly impossible for war to happen, because how are you going to declare a war on another state in the EU?
Right.
They're going to declare war on another state in NATO. It's impossible.
Yeah.
But they were sorely mistaken. Now we have the largest war in Europe since World War II. And this is not directly related, but I do want to bring this up because this is a crazy fact. Did you know over 15,000 pieces of art and historical artifacts have been stolen by the Russian army in Ukraine?
Yeah, I had heard that they were stealing lots of like crazy shit that people don't really talk about.
They stole
like,
over 2,000-year-old stuff, like stuff that was around before the birth of Jesus Christ, like Scythian gold from Ukrainian museums. And this was like organized looting, and this is the largest art heist since the Nazis in World War II. It's pretty crazy stuff that's happening. And man, I'm sorry, it's kind of random, but I just wanted to bring that up. If anybody wanted to look into that online, read the articles about it. It's super interesting.
Well, haven't they taken a lot of children too?
Yeah, they've kidnapped, at least the lowest report I've seen is 6,000. I read one report about how orphanages would hide the children in their homes out of fear that the Russians would take them and deport them, because in the viewpoint of Russia, Ukraine's part of Russia, so it isn't stealing them, it isn't deporting them. They're technically their children, so they can do with them whatever they want, and they can adopt them out to families, which they have done. Recently, there was an interview that somebody was having with Vladimir Putin, where the person bragged to Putin that they had adopted children from Mariupol, whose parents had been killed by the Russian army. I mean, but by the invasion. I don't know if it was specifically the Russian army or how they died.
Is it just because like there could be some justification, like if it's just like their parents died, you'd say, okay, well, what is Russia supposed to do with it, right? But is there also situations where their families are alive and they're just taking them?
Almost certainly many of these situations, because there's not a lot of like, oh, let's find out if they've got uncles or aunts living in Ukraine, because a lot of times they're not going to go out of the way to send these kids over there. They're going to deport them or put them through these filtration camps that they have set up all over occupied territory, find out if they have any ties to the government or any ties to the military. If they do, then like sometimes torture will ensue or abuses. If they don't, then they'll probably send them to some place deep inside Russia. A lot of Ukrainians have actually been deported to Russia, and then they have to go through like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania in order to eventually even get back into Ukraine. They literally can't even like go over the to take the 50-mile trip that it would usually take. They have to go all the way around, and it's not really like, oh, it's optional. Do you want to come to Russia? It's no, you're coming to Russia.
Yeah. And I mean, the Russian government could set up a system where if they have children, they could just send them back to the Ukrainian government. They could do that. I'm sure Ukraine would agree to having like a ceasefire area where they exchange children or something.
There has been evacuations of civilians through the front line where they do like tiny like ceasefires in that area so the civilians can get through. But a lot of people are scared to do that because some of those civilian corridors that have been opened have been shelled, and that leads to civilians being killed and aid workers being killed. So it's a real gamble no matter what the situation is. I remember that I was staying with this one family in Kiev, very, very lovely family from Lebanon. Actually, they fled Lebanon because they were sick of war, by the way. So very tragic. But while I was at their house, they were telling me the story about like the Russian military was a block away from their home, like a block, like they're like a tree, like just right there. And they didn't know whether to get in a car and run because they have heard about other cars in the area just being blown up by the Russians, of driving away. And the Russians have been not shy about shooting people as they run away or in the back. And so some of them ran, some of them stayed in the house, but making those determinations as the Russian army comes is insane. And that was during the early days of the war, where the Russian army still felt like an unstoppable typhoon, almost like a natural disaster, less than a military force.
Cameraman 502 for $5 says, Dylan, when debating Laser Pig, Coach Redpill claimed to be living in Kharkiv. When you go back, would you meet him to prove whether he's lying or not?
He's blocked me. He doesn't want to talk to me, I guess, because he said like, no one will debate me. And I said, I will. And then I confronted him on his claims, and then he blocked me.
Hilarious.
I don't think he'll talk to me. From what I've heard about Coach Redpill is that he is very much scared that he is going to be assassinated by the Ukrainian state or by like Ukrainian activists or something. He's like very scared about that. I don't think he would ever want to meet me in person.
Yeah, because he'll be like, "You're gonna dox my location."
Yeah, unironically, I think he would genuinely think I would be a threat to him. So I don't think he would want to talk to me.
Well, he's talking a lot of shit about the president in a war zone. So I mean,
yeah.
I don't know.
Not smart. I mean, he was. It was confirmed that he was detained for a period of time, so he was there at least in the past. I don't know.
Was that confirmed? What was their official confirmation?
I thought there was. I could be wrong, but I
don't think there was any official confirmation.
No? Okay.
I don't remember it.
I mean, there was official confirmation from Coach Redpill.
I thought there was I thought the Ukrainians confirmed it, but someone could look it up, see if that happened or not.
I don't remember. If they did, I mean, I would appreciate to hear it. I just haven't heard a confirmation.
Libertarian Sasquatch for $5 says, "What is an example of the U.S. doing something with zero alternative motive and just purely doing it out of the kindness of their hearts?" I would probably say never. I'd probably say that's never happened.
I'm more of an idealist than I'm a realist. I believe in international state institutions, UN, the power of trade to bring peace, things like that.
But that's within the U.S.'s interest, though.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Is like anytime I could find an instance of America doing something really good, like liberating Kuwait. Well, there was oil involved. What about liberating France? Well, we were attacked by Japan. Like every single time, you're going to find some interest because the amount of people involved and the decision to go to war or to not go to war when Congress votes or when the president uses the AUMF treaty to start bombing somewhere is so diverse that there's never going to be no perverse interest whatsoever. From the beginning,
why is it a perverse interest? Why do you categorize it that way?
Maybe not perverse interest. I'm just saying like no self-interested interest or something like that. Since the beginning of warfare, ever since like people were selling sharpened rocks, they were like an interest to let me make money off these sharpened rocks and make money off of warfare from like people who were making weapons. Like people have always profited off of war. There have been looting. There have been all these different ways that since the beginning of humanity that human beings have gone through self-interested reasons to go to war. That doesn't mean there aren't good moral reasons as well. And other people who are trying to do this for moral reasons. I think the Ukrainian lobby are doing it for good reasons. They don't want their homes to go away. All the activists that I know that are working on this issue, I think they're doing it for good reasons. I think the majority of Americans who support sending aid to Ukraine, which I know that really angers a lot of the populace when I say the majority of Americans hate what you're saying. I think they're doing it for moral reasons as well, because when they see what happened at Bucha, which was a horrific sight both in person and online, they want to send support. They sympathize deeply with the Ukrainian cause. So I think there are going to be self-interested reasons and motives and actors that push us towards war, and there's going to be good moral reasons depending on the conflict. There might be more of it on one conflict and less of it on another conflict, but you're never going to find any war that has no self-interested reason to it. It's impossible.
Right.
I don't understand why that's a bad thing. So
well, I think the framing of the question is a little off. I think there's something implicitly being asked there, because yes, obviously everything a country ever does is for its own reasons, even if it's purely ideological. It's still for its own reasons, right? They think, oh, the world will be safer if we have more liberal democracies versus, totalitarian governments, et cetera, et cetera. And most people would agree with, okay, well, that's good, to help people, right? I think what the question is trying to ask, because I've heard this question repeated a lot, is, is the idea that, oh, America's only doing things not for ideological, we want like freedom and liberty because it'll help us, but more, oh, you're only doing this for some sort of nefarious, selfish money reason, even if the cause violates your principle. I think that's
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, I think it's a combination of both. I think that having a more stable Europe that isn't having nations get invaded and being destabilized is economically better for the United States.
Oh, no, of course.
For Europe. But right. I do also think there's ideological reasons. I think
right, of course. No, I agree completely. But I think to me, the only thing that would be a violation is if we're doing something for monetary reasons, and it violates our principles. And I would say this does not. I'm sure we have. Not sure. I know we have lots of money tied up in Ukraine. We've had lots of money tied up in Ukraine, but it does completely align with our principles of liberty and freedom. So I don't see it as a violation of any of that.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Well, if you accept their narrative, though, it's, America provoked Russia into starting the war for our own economic interest. That's a narrative that is obviously paints America as a nefarious actor.
Which to
I
me
don't
makes
accept,
absolutely no sense.
I don't accept that narrative. Yeah, I don't think the evidence is on the side of that narrative.
The thing that really gets me is this whole war started out of Russian economic coercion.
Of course.
It's like directly,
yes.
like directly them saying our economic interests are more important than your sovereignty, so we're going to invade you, we're going to bomb you because you chose the more beneficial economic deal that you wanted. Since you chose that over us, you're going to pay for it.
What
that
natural
is like
resources
the most direct
wearing?
example.
Well, I mean, that's what annoys me so much when, talking to Dave Smith or Jimmy Dore or something is like, they go, oh, we went to Iraq for the oil. And it's like, wait a minute. They like the largest, or one of the largest oil deposits was just found off of in the Crimea coast, like 2 years before. So you're going to say that Russia didn't invade Crimea for the oil? And now, I think one of the lines that they want to draw for the separatist is just happens to coincidentally include a massive lithium mine or something. Obviously natural resources is playing a huge motivation.
All those batteries.
Yeah, I know, for Russia. And then that just always gets thrown out the window. So it feels very hypocritical.
How are we doing? Are we almost ready to move on?
RBGH fan for $10 says, any credence to the position the U.S. government cares more about money laundering to military contractors, see the Middle East, and doesn't care about causing more deaths to Ukrainians and Russians in the long run?
How's that? How's that money laundering? I mean, you're just paying them for weapons.
I guess it would laundering? Be. Yeah, I'm not sure the laundering. I just would be more like, oh, do you think they just want to make a bunch of money for these companies? I don't believe there's any credence to that whatsoever.
Oh, really?
You can sell. No. Well, no, that's the motivation.
Obviously, it's it's a dual motivation. Obviously, they're doing it a lot. See, when Dylan was talking about the economic conditions of the Ukrainian people, a lot of people think that the aid is going to the Ukrainian people. No, it's going to military contractors to buy weapons to send over. No,
I understand. But the question was, is there any credence to the idea that the U.S. government, all they care about is they're just doing this because they just want to make money for military contract?
I mean, it all depends on what's the U.S. government. If you see the U.S. government as a single entity, right? I think you're analyzing it incorrectly, because when we talk about the Lend-Lease Act, for example, which we signed, which was voted on by Congress, because when I was at the Rage Against Machine rally, I was told again and again, there's been no debate on this. There was a debate on the Lend-Lease Act, and it passed overwhelmingly. The vast majority of Congress was clapping for Volodymyr Zelensky. If you want to have a vote on supporting Ukraine, again, I'm pretty sure we all know how that vote is gonna go. And the reasons all those people have for supporting Ukraine, do we really think that the reason AOC voted for aid is because she wanted to fill the pockets of military defense contractors? No matter what you think of AOC, I find that highly unlikely. And I think a lot of these politicians also don't even have lobbying deals with military defense contractors. Some of them might have defense contractors in their district, and so they want to be able to have jobs. So if you make weapons, then you have jobs in your community. They could have a self-interested reason, and people who take money from defense contractors could have a self-interested reason. But those were not the only people who voted in favor of sending aid to Ukraine. So again, there's a diverse array of motivations for why the United States is involved.
Yeah, some people are just bleeding hearts. True. Like Sitch.
Like me.
D528, thanks so much for being free. Was here for 1 month, says, no YouTube for Lent. We'll miss y'all the most. We'll miss you too. Love Dylan's Ukraine work, even though his social views sound like a chubby Antifa chick's diary.
Amen. Amen.
There you go. Gene the Angry Payment for $5 says, a nuclear war equals a nuclear winter, which equals increased sea ice plus fewer humans. As a representative of penguin kind, I would say go for it.
Oh, amen.
Wow. True. Penguins are the best animal.
They are amazing. Are penguins fish?
Is that the next question? Instead of owls or birds, are penguins fish?
It popped into my head, but
I like it's a good one. That's a good one. Are penguins birds? Maybe that will be the next question.
That's a trick question, isn't it?
It's not, but it feels like it. George De Gennaro for $10 says, Dylan, how old were you when you learned about Azov? I learned about them years ago watching Jimmy Dore reporting on Czech's Notes, The Washington Post.
I was probably like 18 or 17 when I first heard about them. It was when I was studying the history of the Obama administration's position on Ukraine, and I was looking into where these weapons go, and I found some articles online talking about these weapons are going to neo-Nazis in Ukraine. That's probably the first time I heard about Azov was when because there was some legislation on trying to stop weapons from specifically going to Azov. It was probably around that time when I first learned about them. I'm 21 21, so I'm very young. So I remember sometimes people, I get this a few times in my chat, like, where were you when we invaded Iraq? I don't know, probably shitting myself.
Well, I think what George was trying to get at is, one of the talking points is, the Washington Post, they're the ones, that first brought up the whole AZOV Battalion thing, and therefore, now they're saying it's not a big deal, and so, it's weird because to me it's kind of like they're saying, well, that must be a big deal because the Washington Post brought up in the past. It's like, yeah, but you don't trust the Washington Post now, and you didn't trust them then. So why are you trusting their reporting back then when it suited the narrative, I guess?
I think there's a problem, I think, of far right people in the Ukrainian military, but there's also a problem with like political extremists and military all across the world. And when we talk about 2014 and 2022, the situation is very different. Azov came from basically a football club in Mariupol who were basically hooligans and maybe gangster type activity was involved, right? Mm-hmm. And it evolved from that when the Russians invaded Crimea, because the Ukrainian state could put up basically zero resistance. Like they had some, but didn't have enough people to go out and stop it. And so that's when Azov started. And they were kind of like, how the men who invaded Crimea was known as like the little green men? The Azov guys were known as the little black men because they had like the black balaclavas and they completely wore black uniforms. And during that period of time, it was probably its most far right period of time. And over the last 8 years, I do think it's become more milquetoast over time as it has been more and more integrated into the Ukrainian military and has to abide by certain standards. And as it's gotten more international attention, has been delved into more controversy. A lot of its original political leaders have gone off to do different political projects, which have all failed. The political aspirations of the former founder, the neo-Nazi founder, racist founder of Azov, has completely failed not to get a single seat in Arada. Mm-hmm. And I would say that there are still far right people in Azov, absolutely. But the organization is also very different from what it was in 2014.
Right. Well, to me, it's ironic that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, that in 2017 or whenever this was, that the Washington Post was talking about Azov. I mean, people on the right would have hand waved that away as like, oh, they're just being extra woke. And then now it's like, oh, well, they must have been correct back then. It's like, okay. I don't know about that.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What do you think the right's position on Ukraine would be if Trump won re-election and he was just completely in favor of sending all the aid? Do you think it would have like all these people, a lot of them would have like completely 180 and now Trump said it?
Most of them.
Most of them, really?
I think that the libertarians would still be against it, but I think most of everyone else, I think all the populists and the mad crowd, 100% would be in favor of this if Trump was president and doing the same thing.
Gotcha.
So, well, there would probably be, I don't say 100%. I'll say 90%. I'm sure there'd be some outliers, but I think mostly. I think
Marjorie Taylor Greene would probably not be saying what she's saying about Ukraine right now.
No, she wouldn't. But I have a very cynical view that Adam hates, which is that I do think most people's political positions are assigned to them. I don't think they come to them naturally. And I think a lot of it is just tribal thinking. So it's really like, who is the current president? What is he doing? Because, I mean, this is literally what happened in 2014. It was wild. Like, it was... Mitt Romney, and I bring this up every fucking time, Mitt Romney's in that debate with Obama, and Mitt Romney says the biggest geopolitical threat we have to worry about is Russia. And Barack Obama laughs in his face and says the Cold War is over, and all the Democrats go, ha, 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 ha. Russia, that's ridiculous. And then what happens? 2 years later, Russia invades Crimea, and Obama immediately takes he doesn't do anything, but he at least verbally takes a very hardline position against Russia. And then the Republicans in 2014 are kind of like, they don't know what to do because they're like, well, we can't agree with Obama. We have to just kind of be in this weird limbo space. So much of politics is literally just people just doing the opposite of what the other party's doing, which is sad. But
for me, when I was growing up, a big thing that definitely pushed me towards the Democrats was the government shutdowns. And the reason why is I grew up in a home with 2 federal employees, and my grandparents both were feds, but not like CIA agents. They were like, one was a cook and the other one was a machinist, right? Mm-hmm. And them saying like, no, we can't go to work today, we're not making any money. Why? Well, because so and so from the Republican Party has decided that now's the time to talk about how the amount of deficit we have and the amount of debt, and so we're shutting down the country. That pushed a lot of people in my area to really despise the Republican Party. And I think a lot of it is regionally assigned. If we're saying that politics is assigned, it's also very regional. as well, just due to the conditions you face. Because I do think I think a lot of people believe that like whatever you want in your state, in your area is great for everywhere. And I do have more respect than a lot of other Democrats maybe do, or a lot of other left-wing people do, for the idea that America is a gigantic country and the laws that are okay in one place are not going to be okay in somewhere else, right? Like people meme about like the Boers that go and kill people and like needing guns for that. But that is true in a lot of areas like Montana.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I mean, that's a huge divide in the country is, the local versus federal. And yeah, I mean, they're different places, country definitely need different things. So Hex Decimal Delirium for $5 says, once again, Sitch is misrepresenting me. I do not support the unjust invasion of Ukraine. I just don't buy every piece of propaganda surrounding this. Listen, Hex, I didn't say you were supporting anything. All I said was I read literally what you said in the chat, which was you disagree with us and that your wife is from Ukraine. That's all I said. I said you disagree with us. I didn't say you supported it. So, Hugo GLZ for 125 Mega Man X dollars says the U.S. supported every rebel during the Mexican Revolution, costing 2 million lives out of a population of 15 million. The trail of blood of American intervention goes further than in Afghanistan. That's a good point, and I'm sure that America did do that exact thing, and so that would lead like you could easily construct a whole justification for if like some people in Texas wanted to cede to go to Mexico based around all the history. You could very easily craft a justification for that. They for $2 says, thank you for the first super chat. Says, why does Ukraine deserve help but not Kuwait?
What
we did help Kuwait. I don't know.
We did help Kuwait. We did. I don't.
That was a whole.
Are we still helping Kuwait?
For the first war.
I supported. Well, I wasn't alive, but I would have supported the intervention. I mean, basically everyone supported it. Like even like China abstained. Like everybody was either fine with either neutral on it happening or were fine with it happening because, like Saddam very clearly overstepped boundaries when he invaded another country because he couldn't pay his debts.
Right.
What is wrong with helping people strategically, and not helping other people who just would not be worth helping? I don't understand.
I'm a huge proponent of helping the rebels in Myanmar. I'm a huge proponent of more sanctions on military companies in Myanmar and supporting the rebels. But the problem is it's not as strategically useful as helping other countries. And I do think that's a big problem. And it does make the United States look hypocritical. It's part of the reason why I support international institutions and strengthening them like the UN is so if it's not in the nation's interests, then international institutions can be the ones to try to intervene and we can have an international response, since it might not always be in America's interest to go in the middle of Timbuktu to fight random villagers.
Why is it, there seems to be like an all or nothing implication in that question. Why is it if you can't help everyone, you shouldn't help anyone? I don't get why that's a bad thing.
It's a logical fallacy. It's just an argument thing. Well, no, it's supposed to, I think what's supposed to do is they're supposed to be saying, see, the selection bias for America is because of some nefarious reason.
They're saying you're doing it because it's in your economic interest, which all of us have already said, hell yeah, it's in our economic interest.
Sure.
What's wrong with that? So,
well, I mean, the Kuwait was the first Gulf War, right? I mean, wasn't everyone in favor of that? Who was against that?
There was some protests in the United States.
Oh yeah, I went to one of those. Remember, I went to pick up chicks. So.
Yeah, there.
Did you?
I did. Yeah.
Were you successful?
Well, I went with 3 chicks, so I was off to a good start already.
They're like, hey, Adam, you want to come protest this evil military, giving money to the military company's war? And you're like, hell yeah.
I ended up in the LA Times at that protest. So
there you go.
That was great. But anyway, yeah, no, of course. Look, I was a young kid. I thought war is bad. I know killing people bad, okay?
There you go. Very simple.
Yeah. Didn't know much about it. I knew girls. Good. Very good. Lots of girls will be there.
Joe the Meg for $5 says, good on you for all your work here, Dylan. I disagree with you on some political stuff, but your work here is #based.
Well, thank you. It's okay, man. Whether or not you're wrong on the few occasions that you disagree with me, like I still appreciate your support. I'm kidding. I'm kidding, of course. Thank you. I appreciate it. I do.
Thunderstorm for $5 says the AZOV symbol is the Slavic god of wind and protection symbol against wolves and danger, called the Wolf's Angel.
I used to use that symbol. I don't, as far as I know, they changed their symbol earlier this year because it had so much controversy around it. Because there's like no defense for the wolf's angle, in my opinion. Like, I only see it used by Nazi groups. I don't see anybody who actually cares about like Slavic stuff to use it. And I think it actually originated from Heinrich Himmler. So I don't think I could have sworn that was his origins. If somebody knows the pagan religion more than me, can correct me, I would appreciate it. But as far as I know, they've changed their symbol to keep the N and the I, which represents the national idea. That's what they say, but I don't really trust that's the origins, even if they've changed it to mean that now. I guess that's good. But I'm very happy that they're changing their symbology.
Solodoge, thank God I can finally fight the aliens. Thank you for 6 months. Says, nothing wrong with taking away the rights of people who, quote, belong to the enemy. That totally doesn't lead to things like Japanese internment. I mean, I don't remember a part in the conversation where anyone here advocated for such a thing, but...
Only Serbians.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. It's joking, of course.
Fondue for 11 months, thank you. Says, there's a video by Matt Kolov called The Politics of War that I keep coming back to. It's a D&D video, but it's relevant. Pride, fear, and self-interest. Yeah, I mean, I think it's what Adam's saying. You know, there's always... I don't think you can separate all these things out to make these clear things. You know, these clear delineations between, you're just doing it for your self-interest, when that's, obviously at play in every situation all the time. Magor for $2 says, while we're crapping on libertarians, I want to say that libertarians need to accept that there are far more Karens in the world than libertarians. Most people want you to live like they do. Okay. Andrew Clark for $2 says, for all the people who say Ukraine must surrender some land to Russia or there will be World War III, I would say Russia didn't launch nukes when the Berlin Wall fell.
I was having a debate about this yesterday. I find it hard to believe that the Soviet Union tore Afghanistan to shreds over 10 years. I don't know if you ever looked up population gap of Afghanistan during the war. It just like boom.
In Russia?
No, the population graph in Afghanistan. It is
No, I mean during the Russian war.
During the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
Yeah. I did, because I remember we watched some Hassan video where he was basically ignoring this, and it was something like, well, first of all, it was like 50% of all villages were destroyed in the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and I think they lost like 20% of the population, or no, not, that's too high. It was like 9% or something. Like, it was like 2-3 million people out of like 15 like died. It was like astronomical.
It was crazy.
Of,
they dropped a lot of bombs in the country. They basically tried to turn the entire country to a fucking parking lot. Yeah. And that was their strategy and how to deal with the Mujahideen, and they failed. And after 10 years, they pull out before the Soviet Union collapses. It's hard for me to believe that after fighting all of that and be willing to go to the worst ethical limits and how you bomb a country, that they still wouldn't use a nuke and literally would rather lose the war, withdraw, and then have the Soviet Union collapse rather than use one of those weapons. So I think people are just really overplaying it when it comes to the likelihood of this type of weapon being used in this conflict. I mean, it's not impossible, and we should still be concerned that Russia announced today that they're suspending the participation in the New START treaty. Like, that's bad, but again, most of that most likely is posturing and chest beating, like odds are.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are key differences between then and now, but I agree that I do think it's unlikely that this will occur this way. But I think it's more likely that if we did nothing, that's going to drastically increase nuclear risk in the future. Arithmus for $6 says, right, what I think a lot of people don't understand about Ukraine aid is that most of what we are sending them is our hand-me-downs. We're replacing most of that hardware anyway, so it's not really costing us much to send it over.
That's true.
So there you go.